Michael Olliff, a lead member, provided practical examples of innovative spaces for learning both in schools and the workplace.
We have to do all the hard work and working with much tighter budgets and much harder constraints. So I'm just going to pull this back to a few sort of issues and themes. So all of that sort of fun stuff you've seen there, what does that actually mean for us in the education sector? So funders, first of all. So these spaces aren't briefed. I mean, that's a massive challenge we have. It doesn't fit into the common BB98 minus 15% formula. And a lot of the current agenda and discussion is around driving these kind of spaces out in favour of more sort of formal teaching spaces and spaces which are linked by sort of internal corridors. So my sort of hypothesis at the moment, we're at the risk of delivering another generation of schools that are actually going to become paralysed by congestion. And what goes with that is cramped conditions could lead to levels of increased aggression, bullying, intimidation. But then, looking at schemes like this, no one would argue that that space at Elm Green sort of doesn't add to the student experience. That space there is used for assemblies, whole school assembly performances, exhibitions. If you go on YouTube, you can see them doing a gangland style, the head teacher doing that. It's embarrassing. But they've even held sort of First World War battle reenactments in that kind of space. So it is a incredibly impressive sort of learning environment. John Wilkinson, the head teacher, attributes the design with an 80% reduction in antisocial behaviour and a 70% drop in absenteeism. So you start to then link those spaces actually have a measurable benefit. So the question here is, how can we deliver these spaces still within the constraints that we're now operating within? Because we can't change the constraints. It's not about sort of trying to rewrite the rulebook. So what does that mean then for us for architects at the receiving end? Now we can look to universities for clues. The introduction of student fees, that's brought a marketplace in the university sector. Students are now armed with mobile devices, they're linked to social media, and they're publicly expressing their views. Universities are now placing student experience at the top of the design brief. That's the first thing we get hit with. So to get that, the trick here is the formal teaching spaces. We're now looking at ways to create much higher space utilisation. Typically, British University is operating less than 40% space utilisation. It's an incredible waste of resource. So these spaces between, they provide the glue. The spaces for socialising, meeting colleagues, quiet study, writing up lecture notes, reading, researching, revision. I'm not quite sure how we crept in there. But also on a practical level, these spaces sort of soak up the real high volumes of students. So if you're improving the space utilisation, you're pushing more students through that. So you need spaces that can absorb those numbers. And what this is the new campus for University of Reading, Malaysia. And it's got just a series of formal teaching spaces wrapped around a central open forum, not covered forum space. LRC below, everything social around the middle, and more formal stuff around the edge. So as architects, we've got to work within space constraints, but in order to do that, we've got to work more creatively with the allowances we've got for circulation. We need to test some of the formal spaces, perhaps blend and overlap areas, and sort of really start to push that space utilisation. So what does that mean for learners? And unfortunately in this slide, typically with architects, when we go around photographing buildings, there's never any kids in them. But new spaces require a fundamentally different behavioural response. And I think it was Winston Churchill that said, the famous quote, "We shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us." And for me, it's sort of no surprise in schools where students are forced to work in set routines, blindly following rigid timetables, shuffling from one classroom to the next. These are students that lack any sort of skills for independent thinking. So we need to equip them with skills that they can start to make decisions for themselves in buildings where they can have choices of spaces to support all the different activities they're doing. So what does that mean for teaching? It also follows that teachers will need different skills if they're going to work more flexibly around these sort of ranges of spaces. So the skills that you have as a teacher delivering a set lesson, standing in front of that group of 30 children in the classroom, they're very different to those required when you're working with large groups of students. They're working independently, they're working at different speeds, and they're working on long sort of project-based activities. This is Children Trinity School in Bridgewater. So you've got a series of learning federations that have this sort of tiered presentation space, lecture type space, with informal group working in IT space and then formal classrooms grouped around it. What you get with this type of layout is a strong sense of community. Teachers are now doing team teaching, as we've already heard. And they're now supporting students that have more individual tailored learning plans. So what does that mean for interiors? This is not one of ours, this is Leicester University, but these large spaces, they will fail. They will, unless they've got really high quality furniture and fittings that will bring them back to life. We need to create some headroom in the budget in order to spend the money on high quality fixtures and fittings. But universities and Ken's corporate clients, but they really understand the value that high quality interior design and branding brings to their institutions. So challenge for us is, how can we get high quality design in there that will undoubtedly enhance children's sense of self-worth, will inspire confidence, and that then leads to improve standards and outcomes. And fundamentally, schools need to be a place where children feel safe. Children are becoming increasingly sort of multi-task. Well, that's what they tell us. But they do have an ability to tune out noise. And some of them can work well in these spaces, but we still got to recognise others are still very easily distracted, and they do need areas where they can really focus on the task. So the role of the physician in this process is absolutely vital to get design spaces that do work with these multiple modes. So we can tune these spaces, so we can have spaces where you've got a bit of acoustic vibrancy, but you need to pair that up with spaces with lots of soft surfaces, soaking up the noise. This school in Bridgend in South Wales, it replaced two failing schools in two very economically deprived communities that had actually the highest teenage suicide rate in the UK. The result now, through this new community school, is we've got a new community. It's grown up around the school. The school's at the heart of it, and there's a real sense of pride now building up there. So what's it mean for IT? Now, it's quite an interesting one, because over the years I've been working in the education sector, my job seems to be getting easier and easier. IT seems to be becoming less pervasive in terms of the actual plugs and sockets and cables and all that sort of stuff. But with the shift it's much more about providing the space where students can sit with their devices. These devices are becoming more mobile, with really good wireless networks, supporting the use of tablets, laptops, smartphones. They're the things that will help motivate young people to let them engage with learning. So our challenge now is less about sort of getting access to the data and finding a PowerPoint and a data socket to plug it into, but it's more about actually then providing the power to charge up all these multitude of devices. And I expect you're all the same as me that, whilst the device gets smaller in your bag, these transformers, plugs, cables are getting bigger and bigger. So building services is the other, similar to acoustics. Big spaces need very careful attention to internal environment. So as with a sort of traditional school with lots of corridors, you don't necessarily need heating and ventilation. But these kind of big spaces really do need to be comfortable. They need to encourage students to dwell and inhabit for longer periods of time. But again, linking to budget, the solution is not just to throw expensive bits of kit at the problem. Budgets are fixed, so we've got to find ideas and designs that can take advantage of more passive measures. So natural ventilation, daylight, perhaps using waste heat from adjoining spaces to help heat those spaces. So, wrapping up, so what does that mean to all of us? Well, in between spaces is, we believe, should be the focus for creating successful learning environments, and that these in between spaces really can enhance the range of working activities. And then just leave you with a sobering thought: what's the alternative to that? Well, it's that, isn't it? Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.